Welcome back to Self-Love Ignited. Today on the podcast, I am interviewing Abby Doyle. Abby and I talk a lot about her own story around food, wanting to control food, so different types of disordered eating that she struggled with over the years, body image, and self-love, her relationship with herself. We talk about how she overcame that when she was forced to slow down and how she now helps other women do the same. We talk about inclusivity. Who is self-love for? Who is body positivity for? Is there a space for you within this movement? And how do we get there? This is a really, really great conversation. Abby is a certified health coach. She is a meditation teacher. And of course, she has a whole lot of personal experience to bring to the table. She now helps women overcome the exact same thing. So jump on in, meet Abby. She is wonderful.
My name is Katie Allen, and this is Self-Love Ignited. Let's get to it.
Welcome back to Self-Love Ignited. Today on the podcast, I'm interviewing Abby Doyle. Abby, I am super excited to have you here. We've chatted a little bit outside of this area, and I cannot wait to hear more of your story. So welcome. Why don't you take a moment and introduce yourself to everybody?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Katie. I love your podcast, first of all. Let's just say that. The topic of self-love is just so important, especially for women, and that's exactly the energy that I'm bringing to my work. So I'm a food and body freedom coach. From the accent, you can probably tell I'm from the UK. I'm from the Northwest, Liverpool, for anyone who's heard of that small city. And I'm essentially helping women to break free from diet and reconnect to their bodies, heal their body image struggles. But on a really kind of deep level, it's bringing self-love, self-connection, and rediscovering their true authentic selves to be able to then show up in the world of more love, more compassion for themselves and others. I think starting with dieting is really important in our body image, because pretty much all women go through struggles with that at some point, and it just kind of snowballs into this much deeper aspect of self-love. So yeah, thanks for having me on. I feel like our messages align perfectly.
Yeah, they do. I know when we connected, it was we need to speak. We need to have this conversation.
Yeah.
And I love your philosophy, and I love what you do, and I know that you do it because of your story, right? Because it's what you've lived through. It's lived experience. So Abby, I would love for you to tell us a bit more about you and your background. This podcast is all about women who have gone through these transformations in their own lives. So I want to just invite you to share your story with us. What did this look like for you? Where did your challenges with yourself begin?
This is really interesting for me, because every time I think about my story, I notice more and more little golden threads that I've run through. And I went for a walk about an hour or so ago, and I was kind of just thinking about my story, and little things were popping up. And so if I go back to my childhood and just give you a bit of information on my background. So I grew up in the Northwest of the UK, really loving, supportive parents, but somewhat overbearing, in the sense that the background that I came from, we didn't have a lot of money. We were a working class family in a fairly poor part of the country. And within my family and extended family, I'd never really known of anyone who had gone to university. I didn't really know anyone who had gone outside of just the standard realms of your average job, maybe working in a shop or working at a school, all very valid jobs. But I'd never really known any family members or just anyone close who had gone on to higher education and kind of moved into the big wide world, essentially. And my dad at a young age noticed for both me and my brother that we were quite clever, We did well in school. We picked things up really easily. And he really values knowledge and facts. And he was always that person who was reading every textbook he could get his hands on. And I think he probably wanted to live vicariously through us. The fact that he never got a chance to go to college, university, or anything when he was younger. And so there was a lot of pressure put on me there to make the priority academic success, to live up to his expectations, essentially. And I know he did it from doing the best with what he knew, and he was doing it from a loving place, but I did feel a lot of pressure as a child. And so growing up into teenage years, I got put into a private school where I earned a scholarship, and that was seen as like a really amazing thing in the family. No one had really done that before, and so it was all gearing up towards me. The idea was I was going to go and study medicine, I was going to be a doctor, I was going to go to university and do all these amazing things. And somewhere along the way, once I got to about 16, maybe 15 years old, I started realizing that a lot of what I've been doing, I was just living to please my parents, to please my teachers at school, to keep up with the other girls that I was in school with, because they were all under similar pressure from their families. And part of me just thought, what am I doing? This doesn't feel right. And there was a little bit of a rebellious spark kind of came through, and I started partying, going out late, drinking, and my food and what I was taking in seemed like a way that I could control certain things, because obviously I was struggling to control what my future was, what my destiny was, how I wanted to show up in life, because I felt like all of that was being pressured from external sources. And so I started really controlling every little thing that I was taking into my body. I remember at the time, it was around when Tumblr was really huge, and there was a lot of pro skinny, pro anorexia kind of posts and websites around, and I kind of fell into a bit of a hole where I was really consuming a lot of that sort of stuff, and it felt very normal for me to restrict my calories as much as I could. I remember a friend of mine was in a similar position, always felt like a bit of a competition between us, who could lose the most weight. I was smoking instead of eating a lot of the time, and just really not looking after my body at all. And as you can probably imagine, my mental health took a bit of a plummet along with that experience. And so I spent a few years in my kind of late teenage years just having a very turbulent time, not really knowing what I wanted to do, just knowing that I needed to control something, and that I didn't want to follow along with what everyone else was telling me I had to do, but I didn't know what my other options were. And so moving forward a few years, I'd gotten past, my family had finally accepted, I decided I didn't want to go to university, but mental health wise, I was really struggling. I didn't know who I was, what I wanted to do. And I started realizing that I was feeling really awful. My body felt awful. My mindset was awful. My relationships were really suffering. I was very grumpy. I was very down. I was very self-critical of myself physically and in every other way as well. And my parents had always been into fitness, and they'd actually worked in gyms. They'd taught fitness classes. My dad was a karate sensei and a karate competitor. He was really into martial arts, so I'd always watched that growing up. And so for me to kind of step into that world, I saw it as something where I noticed that my parents were able to look after their bodies. They had a lot of experience. They could bring me into the gym and show me what to do. It didn't feel so intimidating because I'd been around that environment. I just never paid any attention to it. And something kind of switched where I was like, I need to start looking after myself, or things aren't going to go well for me. And so I kind of started moving into that world. I managed to give up smoking. I was so proud of myself. And unfortunately, because I didn't really do any of the inner work behind that to love myself or to reprogram things that I thought about myself, it slowly turned into an obsession with fitness and health. So I kind of went from one extreme to the other, where I went from really not treating my body well at all, barely eating, into being obsessed with workouts. I was controlling every ingredient. I was that person who would stand in the aisle in the shops reading everything on the back of a food item because I was so particular about everything I would eat. And that went on for years. I don't think any of my family really realized how intense it was. And when I look back on it, it was definitely, I would describe as orthorexia. I was never diagnosed with any eating disorders, but I was heavily in disordered eating for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And so it kind of came to this point where I felt like trapped in my own body, in my own self, and I didn't feel like anyone else knew or understood what was going on, but also that I couldn't tell anyone because I felt so shameful about it. And it just started getting to this stage where my entire life revolved around it, and I started noticing everything else kind of crumbling apart. And I remember thinking, I had a partner at the time and we broke up, and everything came crashing down as it does after a breakup. But I remember it kind of gave me this nudge as if to say, what am I even doing with this life when I'm living it all just for going to the gym, counting my calories, meal prepping on a Sunday? And I could understand why my partner had broken things off, because I think energetically he was feeling that I just wasn't really there. I was like a shell of a person.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of had a bit of a spiritual awakening and started reconnecting to that inner essence in myself. Like this little voice started coming through past the inner critic, just a little tiny nudge, just saying to me, slow down, pay attention to when you're feeling tired, pay attention to what your body's trying to say. There was little things that were coming up. And around the same time, I actually had a really bad injury with my hip, which is what got me connecting back to my body in the first place. And I had to go through a really major operation. And this was all around the same time where, when I was forced to slow down, I really started noticing little things, like my body was talking to me. I wasn't rushing about. I wasn't able to go to the gym. I couldn't even prepare food for myself for the first few months. So I had help with that from my parents. And when I was forced to not be able to engage in all those disordered behaviors that I had been, that little intuitive voice started coming back. I've been going too quickly for so long to even notice it. And it really started coming through. And from there, the deconditioning, the peeling back the layers, all the reprogramming stuff just spiraled. And that was in 2018. We're 4 years on now. And if I think about the person that I was, I don't even know who she is. I feel so sad and so sorry for that girl, but also so grateful that those things happened, because now I can show other people who've been in those positions how to come through it, that it's possible, that you can do it as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I love your story. I love how you said that every time you look back, you see like more golden threads and more connections and more like sort of the richness of it and the extra layers. And I think, you know, when we're in it, when we're in the depths of it, we can't see it. You really do need to step out. You need to get a different perspective. And the other thing that I really loved about what you just said is, you know, you had your hip injury, and it was like, you were forced. You were all these things that you had needed to do for so long. You'd been pushing, you'd been avoiding, you'd been like outside of yourself. Instantly, it was like, stop, you can't. So all of those things that you developed over the years were instantly taken away from you. And I can imagine on some level that would have been very traumatic and incredibly challenging. But also it got you here today, right? So what a blessing,
Yeah.
guys.
I remember friends who kept saying to me through the whole time, because the operation itself was very intense. Essentially, when I was born, my hip sockets didn't form properly, and so they had to go in and kind of cut the bones, put screws back in, and I could not walk. I could barely lift my leg. My parents were like taking me to the bathroom and stuff in the middle of the night. And so for someone who had been really into fitness and exercise, very concerned with how I looked, that was really hard and intense. And a lot of friends said to me, oh my God, this must be so difficult. Like, you're doing so well. And it really was. But at the same time, I was kind of amazed by the fact that this little kind voice was starting to come through, because for so long I'd just been listening to this nasty critic. And I really think the big key to that was slowing down.
Mm.
And I was forced to slow down.
Yeah.
But so the universe plonked me on my butt basically and told me that I had to slow down, and that was what came from that.
Yeah. That's awesome. So, when you were sort of forced into this journey of slowing down, you were forced to do that, but then that voice in your head, that kind voice, that intuitive voice, you realized was still there, and it was still talking to you, and you had just been going too fast for too long to actually hear it. Once that began, 4 years ago, tell us about that journey. Once you sort of had that, like, once you noticed it, what did you do with it? Because I feel like it would be really easy for somebody to hear that and notice it and be like, no, it's too scary. That's a new thing. I'm just going to ignore it. So how did
100%.
you sort of lean into that new way of being?
Yeah, it's a great question. Because at first, when it first started happening, I actually genuinely felt like I was losing it a little bit, because I don't remember that voice from before. And I was like, what's this new kind of story that's trying to come through? But it was obviously the authentic me that was still in there from before. All the conditioning that we get on top of us and all the things we go through, it was still there, and it was kind of trying to poke its head through and say, like, come back to me. And I remember one of the really powerful things for me was using a journal. So that was something I did a lot as a kid, and I just used to love writing. And because I was just sat with very little to do, watching TV shows, watching films, talking to family, there's only so much of that you can do. And when you're sat in a space where there's a lot going on physically and mentally, to process my thoughts, it just felt really natural to grab a pen and paper and start getting them out onto the page. And the more I started doing that, I was able to look at the patterns of what was coming out of what I was thinking. I was able to actually physically see those patterns on the page, and how, on different days I would feel differently about myself. And then I could start to link it back to, well, what had I done on that day? Had I slept well? Had I eaten well? Had I done anything kind for myself? So at that point, it was even just things like, because I couldn't move or do much, just like moisturizing my hands and being really present when I was doing it. Because I didn't have the option to do many things, I found myself being really super present in the things that I could do, because I was incredibly grateful at that point for the things that I was able to do. So really slowing down and just getting present with things, I'd then be able to link that to, okay, so when I've had days where I've done that kind of voice seems to be stronger, and the critic tends to slip away, because I was able to just be present in the physical sensations. I was able to be with my body and really listen to it and honor the things that were coming up over this mental chatter that I was so used to nagging on at me and telling me. And the more that happened, it was a really long process, and I think that still happens now. It's a never-ending thing, isn't it? But the more that I was able to do that and realize, as I slowed down, as I gave love to myself, as I connected to my body, the nastiness kind of got really quiet, and the love and voice grew much louder and much more supportive, and my intuition grew much stronger. And so I think just that was the start of everything kind of unraveling. And from there up to this point, I've built a lot into my daily practices, and I've gone through a lot of different kind of healing tools and modalities to help reprogram all of the things that have been looping round and around in my mind since I was a child. So slowing down and getting a journal, the two most powerful things for me.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you say that, because the longer I do this, like, I've been coaching for 5 years now, and I've had this podcast for about a year and a half, roughly. and I've had a lot of conversations about self-love, about body image, about how we relate to ourselves. And inevitably what you're saying is the core of it, because I feel like most people, I think it's human nature, we want like the quick fix, right? We want like the magic thing that's just going to instantly make it better. But all of these sort of repetitive things that I hear again and again are the basics: gratitude, slowing down, being present, noticing, right? Reflecting what's on the inside, bring it to the outside, reflecting, whether that's journaling or whether it's speaking to somebody, or everybody does that differently. Some people do it through art, but it's like all of those core things is what it is. There's no magic thing outside of you that is going to switch this, right? It's not like a light switch. You can't just flick it on and off. It's like slow down and go within, and slow down and go within, and slow down and go within. And it is a practice, and it's a relationship.
100%. Like, one of the things that I am really proud of is the relationship that I built with my body. It is a partnership for life. Like, we're literally born with this body, we will die with this body, and it's us and this body always, no matter who else comes and goes. And so I think when I realized that, it's so obvious, but when you say it, it's like, what's the point of me being at war or seeing this home as an enemy? This is the body I've been given. It brings me through every single day. And so it just made sense for me to start by maybe feeling some kind of neutrality or acceptance towards the fact that this is my body. And then from there, I was able to move towards building that relationship up. It became a friendship. And then now it's a deep love and partnership where we're always supporting one another. Some days might be more focused on other things. Some days might be just a body love day. But yeah, it's such a simple concept. And as you said, it is always about that going within and doing these really basic practices. But the actual transformation is a process. And I think, we're so conditioned into wanting a quick fix. And unfortunately, that's not how it happens.
No, it's not. It's not. I want to know, because you've used lots of different terms so far. Do you identify with self-love? Is that where you feel like you're at right now? Do you feel like that was instant? Like, what do you identify with? What do you identify this journey as?
Yeah. Definitely now it's self-love, deep self-love. Because it goes beyond the body. And I think it all started with the body. And one thing that I want to just caveat is, particularly when I started this journey, I was in a slim body. I am in a white, able-bodied, cisgender body. So for me to say, I've gone on to body acceptance, body love, and moved through those stages, it's taken a lot of work, but it's been relatively easy, I imagine, compared to what a lot of the journeys and stories are of other people who aren't in the same type of body that I am. And so I really want to acknowledge that. But at the same time, I do completely understand that, the point that I came from, where I'd been in such despair and disappointment towards my body, I could have never imagined saying self-love or body love. I was just like, I almost had that attitude of people who were super confident in their bodies or just didn't even care. I was just, I would almost see that as quite cocky, maybe quite arrogant. And it's something I think that we're told as well, like, she loves herself so much, she's so full of herself. It's seen as like a bad thing to be in that space. And I used to almost cringe at women who were in that space, but actually it was a mirror reflecting back to me the bits of myself that I didn't want to look at, the parts I was repressing because I was scared and didn't understand that that was an option for me. And so it's definitely been a big journey through all of the stages. I first had to become kind of neutral towards it rather than disappointed, and sometimes even in disgust at my own body. And then it moved through acceptance. And then from there, a friendship, and then from there, love. But that's been like a 4-year journey.
Yeah.
And I know it's not that straightforward for everyone. Not everyone is going to reach being in love with their bodies, but that doesn't mean you can't treat your body with love. You don't have to be in love with your body to treat it kindly.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure people realize that you don't have to want to run through the streets naked to take care of your body and give it love. It's
Yeah.
all individual based on what we've experienced and who we are in this world as well.
Right. Yeah. And what you experience, what I experience, what every single person listening to this or watching this will experience, has experienced, it's all different. And yeah, there's no one, just like there's, a billion different types of relationships and marriages and friendships. And it's the exact same with our relationships with ourselves. So the labels, and that's one reason I ask the question about self-love, right? Is because I think a lot of time people get caught up on the label and it's like, I'm so far from that, or I could never have that. And it's, okay, well, maybe you're so far from that. Maybe you're not going to get to that label how you see it now, but that doesn't mean that you can't get to a really beautiful, peaceful, calm, kind place. Like there's so much room in there for you to sort of find the place that feels really good to you. Yeah. What is your mental health like now in comparison? And I ask this question because I think some people don't see the connection between self-love and mental health. It's like we still see them as very separate things. So what is your what's your daily like now? Obviously we all have good days and bad days. That's still normal. You're still human, but what does that look like now?
Yeah. So completely agree. I think and because self-love is such a trendy thing at the moment as well, I think people can often misconstrue that as like self-care and self-love, so that like getting a bath with candles and having a glass of wine, like self-love, yay. And those things are lovely to to care for yourself and to relax and all of those things, but I think self-love itself is really like a foundation of our relationship to ourselves and therefore to our mental state, to our emotional state. So I think for me personally, I used to be quite anxious. I used to be very, very, very critical of myself, severe lack of confidence and self-doubt. And of course, in terms of my mental health, then I was usually experiencing some form of anxiety, a lot of turbulent moods. I found my emotions quite hard to deal with and process, and that I'd often create a lot of kind of like internalized anger, which mental health and physical health is never great. I imagine my body was going under quite a lot of stress. Fast forward to now, having a foundation of self-love, it just means that when I wake up in the morning, even if it's not a great day, even if I notice it particularly the last few days, actually, I've been a little bit of a struggle. I'm right before my bleed at the very end of the luteal phase, where that like negative critical voice, like anxiety tends to creep up more, just because of what's going on in our bodies. So when I wake up now in the morning, even if it's one of those days where I'm not feeling so great, I'm not feeling so motivated, I'm maybe looking at myself in the mirror and not feeling that love, there's always that foundation that I've created within, that even when things do feel difficult, even when things feel harder, I know that I deserve being looked after. I know that I deserve caring for myself. I know that I deserve to have nourishment, whether that looks like rest, nutritious food, taking a walk, spending some time with a loved one, whatever it is. All of those things have just become a foundation for me now that I'll come back to, whether it's a good day, whether it's a bad day. Whereas previously, all of these things that were swirling around, I didn't have that foundation of self-love. So if anxiety came up, I wouldn't have thought that I was worthy of kind of being out of that, and so it would spiral. Things would get really out of control. I might go into a bit of a mental health hole for a few weeks, and so self-love for me has really just allowed me to have a much more balanced, grounded approach to how I feel about myself, and therefore how my mental health is on a daily basis. It's become a real place of like an anchor for me, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. My experience has been the same. I describe it as being your own rock. So exactly the same thing, right? It's just that solid core, unshakable, being with yourself, being on your own side instead of fighting yourself. Yeah. One other thing, and you and I talked about this a couple weeks back when we first connected. We talked about inclusivity in when we're talking about body image, when we're talking about body positivity, sort of this idea of, do I belong in this movement? Is there a place for me? I don't look like, XYZ. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with that? Maybe what you've seen with your clients or with yourself?
100%. Yeah. For me personally, I feel like the body positivity movement is incredibly important, incredibly powerful, but it was started and created first and foremost by fat Black women, and that's who the movement is for, and those in large bodies. And I didn't fit into either of those categories personally, and so I remember kind of coming to a point where I felt all my struggles with how I feel about my body image or my weight, my relationship with food, are they valid? And should I be speaking about these things when there are people in bodies that have been so much more marginalized, so much more oppressed than mine? Is it right for me to be in this kind of space? Is it right for me to speak on my experiences? And what I've kind of come to the conclusion of, and this may change as times go on, but I feel that there needs to be a voice for everyone who has struggled with how they feel about themselves. I think it's really important that when, particularly for myself, if I was to be approached by or work with a client who I felt like I personally couldn't relate to their struggles or connect with, I would very happily kind of refer that person to someone whose voice I thought was much more relevant, aligned, and important than mine in that space. Women in much larger bodies than myself. I do feel like it's important for them to be heard and seen by those who have experienced those same things. Like weight stigma is something that I, in the body that I'm in now, haven't particularly experienced. So that's not something that I can really help with or speak to. But I think it's really important that we are noticing that distinction, amplifying the voices that need to be spoken about, because it's not just something to do with our body love and how we feel about ourselves. It's a much wider kind of systemic issue that I think is important for coaches to be speaking about, and to just to even be aware of. And those things need to be spoken about, amplified. And I think we also need to remember that there are people who may be wondering the same as what I was. So, is my struggle valid? A lot of us really want to be allies to those who are experiencing certain things. And, the last few years, especially in this world, has brought so many things to light that a lot of us probably hadn't thought about, weren't aware of, and ashamedly hadn't done much about before. And so while that's important, I do think we need to remember that we do have our own validity in our struggles.
Yes.
So to anyone who has felt the same as what I did, thank you for thinking about that. Keep pushing on with, learning about people who are much more oppressed than we are, but also remember that your own struggles, what you felt, is totally valid. It's totally okay. And you can reach out for help. You can speak about your experiences. You can share what you've gone through. We all have a space when it comes to self-love.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. We do. I'm not even going to expand on that because that is absolute perfection. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So, Abby, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do now? What you do now? Sort of how has this self-love journey led you to entrepreneurship and led you to do what you do today? And tell us what you do today, how you help people.
I'd love to. Yeah. So when I mentioned about slowing down and having the operation and all of those things going on, it was around that time when I was like, okay, this is major shift. Something big is changing here. And I've always been someone who loved talking to others. I've always been someone who's been able to make people very comfortable, and people have often shared things with me, or really gone deep with me on personal matters. And I kind of felt like it was time maybe for me to look into how I can help other people, in similar ways to how I was starting to help myself. So I trained to be a health coach, with the Institute of Integrative Nutrition, just after I recovered from the operation. And so I went through that certification. And then as I was doing that, I was healing my relationship to food and to my body image. And so it only felt right that learning how to guide others into caring for their health on an emotional, physical, spiritual level, combined with my personal experience, it just felt natural to lead me into the space of helping women to heal their relationship to food. Because I really, truly think that that is something that so many of us struggle with, or might not even realize how much it is affecting our daily lives and therefore our overall health as well. So that's how I moved into what I'm doing now. And it's just really fascinating to watch women go through a transformation of, I think they come in expecting maybe, I'm going to learn how to stop dieting, which is, the really basic concept behind it. But it goes from that space of, they're fed up being all stuck on a diet cycle, not feeling great about their bodies. And through this deep transformation of, coming to a space of self-love and just really being amazed at the freedom that life can actually have on the other side of that. And so it really is my passion and my mission to guide women through that journey and that transformation. And that's what I'm doing at the moment, just through the form of one-to-one mentorship, hosting workshops. It's been really great now that things have lifted in the UK pandemic wise, that I can get into like local spaces and do some really interactive workshops with people, and that's just felt incredible. So yeah, just opening women up to freedom is how I would describe where I'm at now. And I just want to share the freedom that I've created for myself with everyone else.
Yeah. And that's the thing. And I'm sure that you hear this from your clients as well and people that you speak to, is like, it's freedom. That is the word. I mean, it's the word that I used years ago when I started my own journey. And it's the word that almost every single one of my clients has in some way said, I just want to feel free. I want freedom. I want to experience freedom. And I think it's exactly what you're talking about. It's freedom around food, freedom around your mental health, opening up space, freedom in your body, freedom to follow what lights you up, right? And it's all connected. It is all connected. Yeah. So, okay, as we're getting ready to wrap up, I just want to know if somebody's listening to this and they are maybe where you were 4 years ago, maybe they are at a place of recognizing that they've been going really fast. They have not been checking in with themselves. They've been very disconnected. If there is one exercise, one practice, one thing that you would recommend that they start with, what is that one thing, do you think?
Yeah. Super simple. And I find this works with every single client. And when they realize, like when I first say it to them, I don't think they think it's going to do much, but when they actually commit to putting it into practice, like, oh my God, that's so simple, but it really works. 3 deep breaths. 3 deep breaths. And I do this before we came on this podcast, before I need to do something that scares me a little bit, or if I'm struggling, like really difficult emotions coming up, I just place my hands on my heart, see if I can feel my heartbeat, close my eyes, and just take 3 really deep breaths. And as I go, I just notice everything, every sensation I can feel just really come into that space. Can I feel my heartbeat, feel the air coming in? I can feel my chest expanding. And I just really focus on those 3 deep breaths. And it literally takes 30 seconds to a minute, depending how deeply you can breathe. And it's just like a complete reset. And I think when you can commit to doing a small practice like that really regularly, it just starts bringing in that space. It's just creating those little pockets of space that can then help you lead into all these other practices that everyone talks about: meditating, breath work, hypnosis, speaking to a therapist, all those things. If you can create that little bit of space, that little bit of presence, that little moment of grounding in yourself, it's so powerful, and it really helps lead into everything else. So that would be what I would love people to start with.
I love that. I love that. Okay, Abby, if somebody wants to get in touch with you, if they want to find out about working with you or just want to sort of see what you're up to, where is the best place for them to do so?
Yeah, so I am predominantly on Instagram, and all of my work is there. I have a link in my bio. You can check everything out. So I am at Abby Coaches. Abby is ABBY, and everything you need is there.
Amazing. Yes. And I'll make sure that the link to that is in the show notes, so it'll be really easy to click on through. Okay,
Fantastic.
Abby, thank you. Thank you for this. This has been a soul nourishing conversation for me to be on the receiving end. So I thank you. Thank you for sharing your story and your presence and your energy with us. And I'm really grateful.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been lovely to share. It's not often that I get to go and dive into my full story, so that was really powerful for me as well. I really appreciate the space you've got here. It's incredible. Thank you.
Thank you.